I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are lining up for a race. Let's say it's a marathon. You have trained for years. You have worn through dozens of pairs of running shoes.
Oh, yeah. The whole grueling
Right,
process.
you've sacrificed your weekends. You have completely optimized your diet, your sleep schedule, your entire life, really, just for this one moment.
Hmm.
You are standing there at the starting line. The adrenaline is absolutely pumping in your veins, and you are ready to finally earn your spot. And just as the official raises the starting gun, you look over to the lane right next to you, and there's someone sitting in a golf cart.
Wow. Yeah, it's an incredibly infuriating image.
Well, it gets worse,
Yeah.
because the person driving that golf cart,
Yeah.
it's their dad. And the person who owns the entire racetrack,
Right.
also their dad.
Exactly. And yet the starting gun goes off, and you are expected to just start running as if the rules of physics, the rules of endurance, and really just the baseline concept of fairness apply equally to both of you.
It's absurd.
It is. It's this incredibly visceral feeling of injustice. As humans, we instinctively rebel against it.
Exactly. I mean, it makes your blood boil just thinking about it.
Mm.
But then you step out of that hypothetical race and you look at the real world.
Yeah.
You look at the people making the movies we all watch.
Mm.
You look at the people running the massive corporations we buy from. You look at the people writing the laws that govern our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you realize that the racetrack of our society is absolute crowded with golf carts. We are looking at a landscape that is murky, it's frustrating, and honestly, it is universally experienced.
It is the absolute definition of a systemic muddy waters situation. It's everywhere. I mean, you can go to any country, look at any industry, and find it, and yet for some reason, we are constantly shocked when we see it clearly.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am so glad you could join us today. Our mission today is to unpack a concept that is universally recognized, quite often detested, yet stubbornly, just incredibly persistent across all of human history. We are talking about nepotism, and we have a massive stack of material to go through today, anchored by a truly comprehensive historical and global overview of the subject. We are going to detail its origins, its various forms, and its pervasive influence in almost every sphere of life.
We really are.
We are going to connect the dots from, ancient philosophy to the popes of the Middle Ages, all the way to today's Hollywood Nepo babies, and the massive global political dynasties that practically run nations.
And if I can synthesize what we are going to explore today, it's really this. While nepotism often feels like a very modern grievance, especially when you see it trending on social media or dominating a news cycle, the historical data actually shows us that it is deeply, almost immutably baked into the human operating system.
Right.
We're going to break down not just what it is, but the mechanical reasons why it happens, why leaders consistently fall back on it, and the hidden structural costs it exacts from society over time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the word itself, nepotism, I have always sort of assumed it came from some ancient king or some royal decree where a monarch handed a castle to their kid.
Sure, that's what most people think.
But our information points out that the term doesn't actually start with kings or queens. It starts with a group of people who supposedly took incredibly strict vows of celibacy.
That is correct, and it is honestly one of the great historical ironies. The origin of the word comes from the Italian word nepotismo, and that word is itself based on the Latin root nepos.
Okay,
If you translate nepos directly, it means nephew.
nephew. Not son, not daughter, nephew. I have to admit, that feels oddly specific.
It is specific, and to understand exactly why, we have to really immerse ourselves in the historical context, specifically looking at the period from the Middle Ages stretching all the way to the late 17th century. We are talking about Catholic popes and high-ranking bishops.
The highest levels of the church.
Exactly. Now, these were men who had taken strict, non-negotiable vows of celibacy. Therefore, officially, legally, and theologically, they had no legitimate offspring of their own to pass their wealth, their lands, or their immense political power to.
Right. If you don't have kids, you can't have a traditional dynasty.
Yeah,
You can't just hand the crown down.
precisely. But these men still had that fundamental human drive to keep power consolidated within their own bloodline. The papacy back then wasn't just a spiritual role. They controlled vast territories, armies, and immense treasuries. So they bestowed these positions of massive preference, the exact kind of preference a king would normally give to a prince upon their nephews.
Okay, but I have to play skeptic here for a second. We are talking about the 15th and 16th centuries. The political landscape was incredibly violent and unstable.
Oh, absolutely.
Like poisonings, assassinations, rival factions tearing cities apart. In that environment, wasn't this just standard operating procedure? I mean, are we judging medieval popes by 21st century HR standards? Weren't they just surrounding themselves with the only people they could actually trust not to murder them?
That is a very fair point, and honestly, it's exactly how they justified it at the time. In a cutthroat political arena like Renaissance Italy, your family was your fortress. You couldn't trust a rival cardinal, but you could trust a blood relative.
Makes sense.
However, the problem was the staggering hypocrisy of it because it was essentially an open secret that many of these so-called nephews weren't nephews at all.
Right, because celibacy was, well, let's just say more of a suggestion for some of these guys.
Exactly. Many of these individuals were actually the illegitimate children of those very popes and bishops, the direct result of broken celibacy vows. But because acknowledging a son would be a scandalous, career-ending admission of breaking a sacred vow, they were conveniently claimed to be nephews instead. It was a brilliant, if entirely corrupt, linguistic loophole to bypass a moral and legal restriction.
It's like the modern equivalent of giving someone a deliberately vague title to sneak them into a corporate structure.
Yes.
You know, you can't officially hire your completely unqualified brother-in-law to be the vice president of marketing
No.
because the board would revolt. So instead, you bring him in as a, I don't know, a special advisor for synergistic outreach.
Exactly.
It's a title entirely designed to obscure the reality of what's happening. Did everyone at the time know what was going on? Was it just an open joke?
It wasn't just a joke, it was a highly formalized, institutionalized method of power consolidation. What's fascinating here is that it wasn't merely about giving a relative a comfortable salary. This was about systematically building a papal dynasty within an institution that was explicitly, fundamentally designed not to be hereditary.
Right, because the Pope is supposed to be elected.
The papacy is an elected position, guided by divine will and the consensus of the cardinals, not a family inheritance passed down like a piece of furniture. But look at the sheer scale of the historical examples. Take Pope Calixtus III.
Okay.
He was the head of the notoriously powerful Borgia family. Upon taking the papacy, he made two of his nephews cardinals.
And becoming a cardinal isn't just a nice title. It is a massive deal. It's the stepping stone to the absolute top. You are literally the ones who vote for the next pope.
You hold the keys to the kingdom. And for the Borgias, the strategy worked perfectly. One of those nephews, Rodrigo Borgia, used his elevated position, his wealth, and his influence as a cardinal to maneuver his way into the papacy decades later, eventually becoming the infamous Pope Alexander VI.
Ah, Alexander VI. He is basically the poster child for Renaissance corruption.
Absolutely. And once Alexander VI was in power, he kept the exact same cycle going. He elevated the brother of his mistress, a man named Alessandro Farnese, to the rank of cardinal. And Farnese, in turn, leveraged that position to later become Pope Paul III.
Okay, let me jump in here because the history gets even wilder. When Paul III became pope, he engaged in his own massive wave of nepotism. But he didn't just appoint established, experienced family members.
No, he didn't.
He appointed his two illegitimate grandsons as cardinals. And their ages. They were 14 and 16 years old.
It's staggering.
I just want you to imagine being a teenager. You're dealing with acne, you're trying to figure out who you are, and your grandfather just hands you the keys to one of the most powerful, wealthy, religious and political institutions on the planet Earth.
It highlights the absolute brazenness of the practice. There was no pretense of merit anymore. It reached a point where it was structurally damaging the credibility of the entire Catholic Church. It actually took until the year 1692 for a formal institutional limitation to be put in place.
1692, that's a long time.
It is. Pope Innocent XII had to issue a papal buller, which is a formal, legally binding public decree from the Pope himself called Romanum Decet Pontificem.
What exactly did that decree do? Did it just say, hey, stop hiring your kids?
Essentially, yes, but in very strict legal terms. This bull explicitly prohibited popes in all times from bestowing estates, offices, or revenues on any relative. It was an attempt to cut the financial cord that made these papal dynasties possible.
Wow, okay.
It was a severe limitation, though, fascinatingly. It still allowed a tiny loophole where at most one qualified relative could be made a cardinal.
It's just a little nepotism, as a treat. Just one cardinal per pope. But I think it's important to realize this wasn't just a problem isolated to the Vatican. It was a broader societal issue that everyday people recognized, deeply resented, and heavily mocked.
Oh, definitely.
There's an incredible description of a historical cartoon in the sources that perfectly captures this. It's an English political cartoon titled The Seat of Honor or Servility Rewarded.
It's a very potent piece of visual satire.
The imagery is just biting. It depicts a man named Benjamin Harrison, who was the incredibly powerful treasurer of Guy's Hospital in London. He is shown as this dominant, almost king-like presiding figure, and he's overseeing a scene of blatant, unapologetic nepotism involving a prominent surgeon named Sir Astley Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
The cartoon essentially shows Harrison giving this corrupt appointment his tacit, smug approval. It's a beautiful visual representation of how long everyday societies have been rolling its eyes at this practice, like we've been making memes about nepotism for centuries.
Yes, and that societal eye-rolling goes back much, much further than 19th century London or Renaissance popes. The ancient world was acutely aware of this danger. The great philosophers recognized it as a fundamental threat to a functioning society.
Really? Like who?
Well, Aristotle explicitly condemned it. He believed that a society, a polis, had to be built on virtue and merit, and that handing power to unqualified family members corrupted the very purpose of the state.
What about other cultures? Was this just a Western philosophical hang-up?
Not at all. Look at Confucius in ancient China. Now, Confucius wrote extensively about the importance of family. The concept of filial piety, deep respect and duty to your parents and ancestors, is central to his philosophy.
Right, so you'd think he'd be all for it.
You might think he would be the ultimate defender of nepotism. Yet, even he recognized the absolute necessity of balancing family loyalty with actual merit when it came to administration. And there is a profoundly powerful mention in the ancient Tamil literature, the Kural, written by the Indian philosopher Viluvar.
Oh, I remember reading this part. It's incredibly direct.
It is. Viluvar wrote, and I think this is a brilliant summation of the entire mechanical problem we are discussing. He wrote, if you choose an unfit person for your job just because you love and you like him, he will lead you to endless follies. He viewed the practice not just as inefficient, but as inherently evil and profoundly unwise.
Endless follies. That is a perfect, timeless way to describe it. It's exactly what happens when you put a 14-year-old in charge of a global religion or an unqualified son in charge of a hospital. So, if the ancients knew it was bad thousands of years ago, why does it persist? Clearly, we didn't learn our lesson. I want to pivot from the historical popes and the philosophers to the boardrooms and the family businesses of today. Because the corporate world is where this really gets deeply, structurally embedded in our modern lives.
To understand the corporate persistence of this, we first need to clarify the boundaries of what we are actually discussing. People use a lot of terms interchangeably, but they mean different things mechanically. First, you have nepotism, which is specifically partiality to family or bloodline.
Okay.
Then you have cronyism, which is partiality to an associate, a colleague, or a friend. And finally, favoritism is the broadest umbrella term that's partiality based upon being part of a favored in-group, regardless of actual job performance.
Let me push back on something right here, because this is where the conversation gets really uncomfortable for a lot of people. Economists often argue that inheritance itself is a baseline form of nepotism. Just the act of passing wealth to your kids is, economically speaking, an unearned advantage based entirely on bloodline.
Yes, that's a common economic perspective.
But hold on a second.
Hmm.
If I build a successful plumbing business or I start a tech company and I work 80 hours a week for 30 years, isn't the entire point of a capitalist society that I get to provide for my family? If I want to leave my business to my daughter, why is that being lumped in with corrupt medieval popes? Aren't we demonizing a basic biological drive?
That is the exact tension at the heart of this issue. You are describing the biological and psychological desire to provision your offspring. And on a microeconomic level, a mom-and-pop shop passing to the next generation, it is deeply natural. But macroeconomists look at it differently.
How so?
They look at the systemic effect. Inheritance is, objectively speaking, the ultimate unearned advantage. The child did not build the plumbing business. They did not take the initial risk. They are starting the marathon in the golf cart.
Okay, I see the distinction. The drive to give it is natural, but the receiving of it is inherently unmeritocratic.
Exactly. And when we look at how this plays out in organizational structures, we have to acknowledge the nuance. In small, family-run businesses, hiring relatives can actually be a competitive advantage. It provides a profound sense of stability and continuity.
Right.
There is an inherent trust. You might not be able to fire your son, but your son is also highly unlikely to embezzle from the cash register. The incentives are aligned.
But I'm guessing that changes when the business grows.
Drastically. As an organization scales up, the mechanics change entirely. In larger organizations, nepotism leads directly to the monopolization of power. When the people making the complex institutional decisions are all closely related, those decisions naturally skew toward favoring their connected group, rather than what is objectively best for the market or the shareholders.
Which makes sense from a tribal survival standpoint. You want to protect your own,
Right.
but the cost to the rest of the company is massive. I was looking at the studies cited regarding organizational nepotism, and the data is brutal.
It really is.
It leads to massively decreased morale and plummeting commitment from the non-related employees. There's a quote from a Forbes magazine article that really stuck with me. It said, "There is no ladder to climb when the top rung is reserved for people with a certain name."
That's a perfect way to put it.
Just imagine that for a second. Imagine you are an executive. You are pouring your soul into a company. You are working weekends. You are innovating. You are driving revenue. But, with absolute soul-crushing certainty that you will never, ever be the CEO because your last name isn't Johnson.
Exactly. Why work a 90-hour week when the promotion, the equity, and the title are inevitably going to the founder's son who clocks out at 3 p.m. on a Thursday? You completely destroy the incentive structure for your most talented people. They will eventually leave for a true meritocracy.
But from the employer's side, why do they keep doing it? Do they just not care about losing good people?
It comes down to psychological comfort and control. Employing your intimates favors perpetuating your own ideas. If you hire a brilliant outsider, they might challenge your vision, they might tell you your product strategy is flawed.
Right, they might actually disagree with you.
Exactly. If you hire your nephew, you know they will support your goals. They will hold you up. It builds a very specific type of fierce, unquestioning loyalty. But that loyalty comes at a severe, sometimes fatal cost to innovation and long-term competence.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's like a company deliberately building an organizational echo chamber. If you only hire your family, you are only ever going to hear the exact same ideas that you yourself grew up with around the dinner table. There is absolutely no friction. There is no one in the room saying, "Hey, actually the market in Asia is shifting this way and our entire assumption is wrong." If an organization structurally rejects outside perspective, how does it survive long term?
Statistically, they often don't. This brings us to a crucial mechanical failure of nepotism. One of the primary consequences we see in the data is that nepotism creates a severe artificial limitation in an organization's network of contacts.
What do you mean by network of contacts? Like who they can do business with?
Yes. Think of every new employee as a bridge to a new network, a new university, a new previous employer, a new set of industry contacts. If the leadership is entirely familial, you have no new bridges.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
It reduces the opportunities for negotiation, connection, and cross-pollination of ideas with diverse social circles and business networks. The organization becomes deeply insular. Over the long term, this leads to a measurable reduction in both the financial success and the actual lifespan of the organization. They simply become less adaptable to rapid market changes compared to their merit-based competitors, who are actively pulling the absolute best ideas and the most diverse networks from the widest possible talent pool.
You are literally choking off the oxygen supply of new ideas.
Yeah.
It might feel safe and cozy in the moment to have your family around the boardroom table, but you are slowly suffocating the business. And yet people defend it constantly. It's in my company, I can do what I want.
They do say that?
But if the corporate boardroom is where the silent economic damage happens, it's not really where the public gets angry. We don't usually see who the VP of marketing is. The arena where the public really sinks its teeth into this debate, where it becomes visible and visceral, is pop culture.
Oh, without a doubt.
Let's move away from the spreadsheets and look at the glittering hills of Hollywood and the massive stadiums of professional sports. Because we can hide a bad CEO behind a corporate board for years. But you cannot hide a bad actor on a 40-foot movie screen.
That visibility is exactly why the entertainment and sports industries have become the perfect modern battlegrounds for analyzing this concept. We are, of course, talking about the cultural phenomenon of the Nepo baby.
The Nepo baby. I feel like you literally cannot log onto the internet without seeing this term debated. The cultural flashpoint really seemed to be that December 2022 cover of New York Magazine. Do you remember that?
Yes, it boldly declared it the year of the Nepo baby. It was a brilliant editorial provocation.
They featured a whole host of notable celebrities, people like Maya Hawke, Zoe Kravitz, Jack Quaid, Dakota Johnson. These are the children of incredibly famous, deeply entrenched Hollywood royalty who have found massive, undeniable career success in the exact same highly competitive industries as their parents.
And while the term Nepo baby is a very recent piece of internet slang, the practice in Hollywood is as old as the industry itself. If we look at the history, the Coppola family is a prime example of a multi-generational entertainment dynasty.
Oh yeah, huge family.
They have produced numerous distinguished filmmakers, actors, and musicians. The careers of Sofia Coppola, Jason Schwartzman, and Nicolas Cage have all been attributed, at least in their critical early stages, to the initial aid, the access, or the sheer gravitational pull of the legendary director Francis Ford Coppola.
Right. Francis Ford Coppola famously cast his own daughter, Sofia, in The Godfather Part 3, which, well, it didn't go over terribly well with the critics at the time, though she obviously became a brilliant director in her own right.
Oh.
But what's fascinating to me is this self-awareness that some of these families have. Look at Nicolas Cage. He was born Nicholas Kim Coppola. He's Francis Ford Coppola's nephew. But he actually legally changed his last name very early in his career, specifically to distance himself from the charges of nepotism.
Yes, he did.
He understood the stigma. He wanted to walk into an audition room and be judged on his own chaotic, unique merit.
It's a very telling career move. It acknowledges the invisible weight of the name. And then you have examples that are far less subtle. Consider Tori Spelling, who was cast in the massive, generation-defining 90s television series Beverly Hills 90210.
Oh, yeah?
It was absolutely no secret to anyone in the industry or the public that her father, Aaron Spelling, was the mega producer behind the entire show.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate again here for the listener. A famous last name might get your headshot moved to the top of the pile. Your dad, the producer, might guarantee you get an audition. Nepotism buys you the microphone. But it doesn't guarantee the audience will actually applaud.
It's true.
Eventually, if you are a terrible actor, the audience won't buy the tickets. The show gets canceled. So doesn't the free market eventually solve Hollywood nepotism? Doesn't merit eventually win out?
This raises an important question about how the market actually works. In theory, yes. The market is supposed to act as the ultimate meritocratic filter, but that assumes the market is allowed to function normally. Where the situation really boiled over into massive public outrage is when the perception of meritocracy is entirely visibly broken and the market filter is bypassed by sheer financial force.
Can you give an example?
A perfect example of this is the controversy surrounding the actor Ben Platt.
Oh, yes, the Ben Platt situation. This is a fascinating case study in how the internet reacts to bypassed merit.
Exactly. To give the context, Ben Platt originated the lead role in the wildly successful Broadway musical Dear Evan Hansen. He was universally acclaimed, and he won a Tony Award for his performance. At that stage, his talent was unquestionable. The merit was proven on the stage.
Right.
However, the controversy erupted years later when it came time to cast the 2021 major motion picture adaptation of the musical. Platt was cast in the lead role once again.
Which on paper makes sense. He won the Tony for the role.
But there were two massive complicating factors. First, his father, Mark Platt, was an incredibly powerful Hollywood figure and, crucially, one of the primary producers of the film. He controlled the purse strings.
Ah, there it is.
Second, Ben Platt was noticeably, undeniably older, around 10 years older than the anxious, isolated teenage character he was portraying.
Yeah, the internet was absolutely ruthless about this. When the trailer dropped, it was visually jarring. He looked like a 30-year-old man sitting in a high school cafeteria. It broke the suspension of disbelief entirely.
It did. Critics and viewers overwhelmingly deemed him far too old to reprise the role on a cinematic screen where the camera is unforgiving. And the critical backlash was severe. For a performance that once won a Tony, the cinematic version ended up being nominated for 2 Golden Raspberry Awards, the Razzies, including Worst Actor.
Ouch.
It highlights a profound mechanical failure in the system. The public felt that a highly coveted leading role was secured and maintained via a parent's financial and production influence, despite obvious, highly visible artistic drawbacks that would have instantaneously disqualified any other working actor in Hollywood. The market filter was removed because his father owned the filter.
That is such a crucial point. It's not just about getting the job, it's about being immune to the consequences of being wrong for the job. And we see this exact same dynamic play out in professional sports, where the metrics for success are supposed to be purely physical and objective.
Yes, sports nepotism is a very raw nerve.
Look at the NBA. We have Thanasis Antetokounmpo, who is the older brother of the 2-time MVP superstar Giannis Antetokounmpo. Thanasis occupies a roster spot on the Milwaukee Bucks. But many critics, analysts, and fans loudly argue that his actual statistical level of play simply isn't good enough to justify occupying one of the incredibly rare, highly coveted 15 roster spots on an NBA team.
Mm-hmm.
But because his brother is the franchise star, the guy who brings in hundreds of millions of dollars, Thanasis is there.
It's a very clear concession to keep the superstar happy. But an even more prominent recent example involved the Los Angeles Lakers and Bronny James, the son of arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, LeBron James. Bronny was selected in the 2024 NBA draft amidst widespread, intense allegations of nepotism.
This story completely dominated the sports news cycle. You couldn't escape it.
Because it struck directly at the heart of the meritocracy illusion. Analysts and experts heavily questioned Bronny's readiness for the professional level due to what was statistically a lackluster performance during his single NCAA college season, especially when you compared his stats to other draft prospects who showed significantly greater promise but went undrafted.
Right, there are guys who shot way better who were sitting at home.
Exactly. But what makes the Bronny James case particularly illustrative of the sheer mechanics of modern nepotism is the behind-the-scenes maneuvering. It wasn't just passive name recognition.
What else was it?
Reports revealed that LeBron's intensely powerful agent, Rich Paul, actively, aggressively discouraged other NBA teams from drafting Bronny. He reportedly went so far as to suggest that Bronny might just go play overseas if he was selected by any team other than the Lakers where his father played.
That is wild. It's not just, hey, give my kid a look. It's actively threatening other organizations to ensure a familial pairing.
It was a concerted, powerful, and ultimately successful effort to leverage the immense value of the father to force the employment of the son.
Which brings us back to why this makes people so incredibly angry. It's not just jealousy. It shatters the illusion of meritocracy that we all rely on to get through the day. In fields like sports and the arts, we desperately want to believe that the system works.
We really do.
We want to believe that the fastest runner wins the gold medal. We want to believe the best actor gets the Oscar. When it is revealed that a roster spot or a leading role was secured not by raw talent, not by sweat and tears, but via a parent's leverage, it breaks the social contract. It shatters the audience's belief in the fundamental fairness of the game. It suggests that the game was rigged before the players even walked onto the court.
It is the golf cart on the marathon track. It fundamentally ruins the integrity of the race for every other participant and every spectator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here is where we need to take a massive pivot. Because it is one thing to see a famous actor's kid get a movie role. We can roll our eyes and write that off as Hollywood being Hollywood. It's low stakes in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
But what happens when that exact same nepotistic mechanism infects the systems that are supposed to represent pure intellect, objective truth, and blind justice? Let's move away from the entertainment world and look at academia and the judiciary. Because when these systems get infected, the societal stakes become terrifyingly high.
This is a critical transition. We are moving from the realm of entertainment to the foundational pillars of civil society. Let's examine academia first.
Oh, yeah.
Universities are theoretically the ultimate meritocracies. They are built on peer review, objective data, and intellectual rigor. Yet it is quite common globally for tenured professors to have their partners, and sometimes their children, hired by the exact same faculty or department in which they work.
Which, just on its face, feels like a massive conflict of interest, especially when you're dealing with public funding, massive research grants, and the gatekeeping of advanced degrees.
It is a profound conflict, and the data bears out the consequences. Interestingly, sociological research shows a strong correlation. Countries with high levels of general public corruption and higher education systems with low competition between universities generally exhibit much higher levels of corruption and nepotism in academia overall.
Are there any specific examples from the sources?
Yes, Italy, for instance, is explicitly highlighted as a prime example. The academic system there has historically been plagued by particularly high levels of nepotism when compared to other developed Western nations. It operates almost like a series of medieval fiefdoms, where department chairs act like the Renaissance popes we discussed earlier, dispensing academic positions to loyalists and family members.
Okay, but the U.S. hasn't always been immune to this either, right? I mean, we have Ivy League legacy admissions, which is a whole other form of inherited merit. But what about the professors themselves?
The U.S. is an interesting case study because it historically handled academic nepotism quite differently. During the second half of the 20th century, blatant nepotism in U.S. academia was actually far less frequent.
Why? Did we just have better morals?
No, it was structural. Universities typically held very strict, explicitly written anti-nepotism policies. They recognized the exact danger we are discussing, the degradation of academic rigor, and they strictly regulated against it. If you worked in the biology department, your spouse could not be hired in the biology department, period.
But there is a twist here, isn't there? A really counterintuitive ethical debate that complicates this whole thing. Because those strict rules actually ended up hurting a very specific group of people.
Yes. This is where we encounter the immense complexity of the gender debate in modern academia. In recent decades, there has actually been pushback against those strict anti-nepotism rules. Sometimes, nepotism, specifically in the form of spousal hires, is actively praised and utilized as a tool for equity.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does hiring a spouse create equity?
The argument centers on favoring female employment. Historically, academia was heavily male-dominated. The idea emerged that if a university desperately wants to attract a top-tier male researcher to their campus, they might have to accommodate his two-body problem.
Two-body problem.
Right. They offer a tenure-track position, not just to him, but also to his highly qualified wife, who might otherwise struggle to find placement in the same geographic area due to systemic biases or market saturation. Historically, this mechanism was used to pry open the doors of these rigid institutions and get female academics into the system.
Wow. That is a really messy ethical knot. You are intentionally using a tool of structural partiality nepotism to attempt to solve a massive historical inequity sexism. It's like using a hammer to fix a watch. You might get the gear moving, but you're breaking the glass to do it.
It is a profound ethical tension. Do the ends justify the means? Does the pursuit of gender parity justify compromising the strict, blind meritocracy of the hiring process? It is hotly debated to this day.
But if academia is a messy ethical knot, the judicial system is where nepotism becomes a threat to democracy itself. When we move from the universities to the courts, the implications become incredibly severe. We are talking about the people who can take away your freedom, your property, and your life.
Exactly.
Let's look at the judiciary in India, because the mechanics of how they appoint judges is absolutely fascinating and deeply troubling.
Yes, the Indian Supreme Court utilizes a highly unique and highly controversial mechanism known as the collegium system.
Right. Explain exactly how this works, because to anyone used to an outside confirmation process like the U.S. Senate confirming a president's nominee, this is going to sound wild.
The collegium system is essentially a closed-loop appointment process. The Supreme Court itself, specifically a group comprising the Chief Justice and the 4 senior-most judges, essentially recommends the names of judges to be appointed or promoted to the higher judiciary. And crucially, they recommend these names to the president in a legally binding manner.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this. The judges pick the next judges, and the elected government basically has to accept it.
That is the practical function of the system, yes. It was originally designed with noble intentions to completely insulate the judiciary from political interference. If the politicians can't pick the judges remain independent.
Sounds good on paper.
However, by creating a completely internal, self-selecting mechanism, it birthed a different monster. There are heavy, sustained, and highly credible allegations from within the Indian legal community that this system exercises rampant casteism, nepotism, and favoritism.
Because there's no outside oversight.
Exactly. There are widespread claims that the higher judiciary is heavily dominated by the sons and nephews of previous judges. The network is entirely insular. Even the various lower judicial services exams, which are supposed to be merit-based entry points, are infamous for being manipulated by these practices.
Let me use an analogy here. The collegium system sounds exactly like a thermostat that is programmed to only listen to itself. If the thermostat decides the room should be 80 degrees and the people in the room are sweating to death, it doesn't matter because the thermostat isn't connected to an outside thermometer.
That's a great way to picture it.
It just ensures the temperature of the court never, ever changes to reflect the actual world outside. Just consider the bitter irony here. Universities and courts are the ultimate pillars of our society. They are the places we go as citizens to find objective truth, blind fairness, and equal protection. Yet structurally, because they require such extreme, highly specialized qualifications, they can easily become the most insular, exclusive, nepotistic clubs of all.
Your thermostat analogy is painfully accurate. In
Yeah.
systems that require extreme, rigorous qualifications like earning a PhD in quantum physics or a law degree, to practice before Supreme Court nepotism acts as an invisible, multi-generational filter. It decides who even gets the resources to compete at that level,
Well,
and the macro societal result is devastating. When a country's judicial system is widely perceived by its own citizens not as a blind arbiter of justice, but as a lucrative family business, the rule of law itself loses all credibility. If the public fundamentally believes that justice is just a hereditary privilege, that the referee is literally the other team's dad, why would anyone agree to play the game? The entire foundation of a peaceful, fair society begins to crack.
that is a terrifying thought. If the referee is corrupt, the game ends in a riot.
Mm.
And that leads us perfectly into the biggest game of all. We have seen how families control family businesses, we've seen how they control the movies we watch, and the courts that judge us. Now let's zoom all the way out. Let's look at how families attempt to control entire countries. Let's talk about the global blueprint of power, political dynasties.
This is the ultimate escalation. This is where nepotism scales up from a local grievance to something that dictates the geopolitical reality and economic fate of millions of people simultaneously. It is a nearly universal accusation in global politics when the relative of a powerful figure ascends to similar power, seemingly without the appropriate independent qualifications.
And before we get into the heavy political theory, we actually have to start this section with another fantastic etymology lesson. We already learned that nepotism comes from medieval popes hiding their kids as nephews. But did you know this exact same mechanism is where the famous phrase, "Bob's your uncle," comes from?
It is a brilliant, highly revealing historical anecdote. The expression originated in the United Kingdom during the late 19th century.
Set the scene for us. Who is Bob?
Bob was Robert Arthur Talbot Gascoigne Cecil. He was the third Marquess of Salisbury, an incredibly powerful figure and a multi-term Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. In 1887, Robert promoted his own nephew to a highly esteemed, incredibly powerful cabinet post. He made him the Chief Secretary for Ireland. The nephew's name was Arthur Balfour.
Now, was Arthur Balfour qualified to run Ireland?
The general public consensus was a resounding no. This was widely publicly seen as a blatant, unapologetic act of political nepotism. The press and the public were outraged. So the running joke became, how did young Arthur get this incredibly prestigious job over far more qualified statesmen? Well, Bob's your uncle. Robert is your uncle. That's all you need.
That is amazing. Don't worry about your resume. Don't worry about your experience. Just remember, Bob's your uncle. And it's stuck. We still say it today to mean everything is sorted out.
We do.
So what does this all mean for modern politics? Let's bring it over to the United States. And before we dive into this timeline, I want to frame this for you, the listener. We are about to look at a historical timeline of how U.S. politicians at the highest levels of the executive branch have utilized family members in government.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at this purely analytically. If we look at the historical timeline, this isn't a partisan strategy. It is a systemic one. From the Founding Fathers to the modern era, every side of the aisle has utilized this. We are simply mapping the mechanics of power.
Yes, a neutral historical examination shows undeniably that this is a bipartisan, deeply long-standing tradition in the U.S. government. It goes all the way back to the founders themselves. President John Adams, the second president of the United States, appointed his own son, John Quincy Adams, as the first United States minister to Prussia.
Now, John Quincy Adams obviously went on to become president himself, so he clearly had political acumen. But the initial leg up was purely familial, and the trend just accelerated from there. Let's look at President Ulysses S. Grant. The historical data indicates that around 33 zero family members or relatives prospered financially from government appointments or employment during his administration. 30. He basically employed his entire family tree on the federal dime.
It was a massive network of patronage. Moving into the 20th century, the practice became more targeted at high-level advisory and cabinet roles. President Franklin D. Roosevelt submitted his son Elliot's name to the Senate for a promotion to brigadier general. FDR also appointed another son, James Roosevelt, as an administrative assistant and secretary to the president. But this wasn't a low-level secretarial job. James was coordinating the activities of 18 different federal agencies. He amassed so much central power that Time magazine suggested he might effectively be considered the assistant president.
And then you have the Kennedy administration, which practically defined the modern political dynasty. President John F. Kennedy made his brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, the first director of the Peace Corps. And most famously, he appointed his own brother, Robert F. Kennedy, as the Attorney General of the United States. He put his brother in charge of the entire Department of Justice.
Which was a massive flashpoint and actually led to legislative pushback, which we will get to in a moment. But the pattern continued unbroken. President Richard Nixon faced lingering, damaging allegations stemming from his brother Donald's highly questionable business dealings with the defense billionaire Howard Hughes, leveraging the familial connection for massive loans.
And it kept going.
It did. Later, within weeks of becoming governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton appointed his wife, Hillary, to chair the Rural Health Advisory Committee. Later, when he ascended to the presidency, he appointed her to chair the incredibly powerful task force on national health care reform. He also later appointed his daughter, Chelsea, to the board of the Clinton Foundation.
And we see it in the most recent administrations as well. In 2017, President Donald Trump appointed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his daughter, Ivanka Trump, into senior advisory roles directly to the president.
Yeah.
This caused a massive uproar because neither of them had any prior public service or government experience, yet they were handling vast portfolios of domestic and foreign policy. He also appointed his son, Eric's brother-in-law, Kyle Unaska, to a deputy chief of staff position at NASA.
And in 2024, President Joe Biden faced intense accusations of nepotism and favoritism for utilizing his executive power to pardon his son, Hunter Biden, of federal felony convictions, completely bypassing the standard Department of Justice pardon process.
So hearing all of that, a massive unbroken chain from Adams to Biden, a logical listener has to ask a very simple question. Isn't this illegal? I thought we had laws against the president just hiring their family or using their power to protect them. Didn't Congress pass a law after JFK hired his brother?
They did. Following the JFK administration, Congress passed the Federal Anti-Nepotism Statute of 1967, often informally referred to as the Bobby Kennedy Law. This law explicitly states that a public official may not appoint, employ, promote, or advance a relative to a civilian position in an agency in which the official is serving or exercises jurisdiction.
Okay, so the law is on the books. You cannot hire your relative in your agency. So how did Bill Clinton put Hillary in charge of health care, and how did Donald Trump put Jared Kushner in the West Wing? Are they just openly breaking the law?
This is where we get into a crucial, fascinating legal mechanism. It all hinges on the exact legal definition of the word agency. In 1993, a lawsuit was brought regarding Hillary Clinton's role on the Health Care Task Force. The case eventually made its way to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. In 1995, the court issued a landmark ruling. They held that the White House office and the executive office of the president itself does not legally constitute an agency for the purposes of adhering to the 1967 anti-nepotism statute.
Wait, so the Department of Agriculture is an agency, and you can't hire your nephew there. But the Oval Office, the literal center of global power,
Right.
is not an agency, so the rules don't apply.
Precisely. The court reasoned that a president needs absolute discretion to choose their closest, most confidential personal advisors. It created a massive structural legal loophole. It allows the executive branch a unique, almost monarchical level of familial appointment power that would be strictly illegal for a mid-level manager in a standard federal agency.
It is the nephew loophole all over again. We started with medieval popes using legal loopholes to make their teenage grandsons cardinals, and we ended up with modern presidents using appellate court loopholes to put their kids in the West Wing. It's the exact same mechanism, just dressed up in modern legal jargon.
It really is.
And we see this exact same dynamic mirrored across the globe, in Europe and the Americas. It is incredibly difficult to eradicate, even when politicians actively try. Let's look at France. In 2009, Jean Sarkozy, who was the 23-year-old son of then-President Nicolas Sarkozy, was poised to become the director of EPAD, a massive public authority that manages Europe's largest purpose-built business district.
And the controversy there was based entirely on a lack of merit. John Sarkozy lacked a higher education degree and had virtually no professional experience, yet he was being handed the keys to a massive economic engine.
And it wasn't just Jean. Sarkozy's other son, Pierre, was a rap music producer. The reports show that Pierre trying to get a highly competitive artistic funding grant through the standard French channels. He was rejected, presumably on the merit of the application. So what does he do? He goes to the Élysée Palace, the French equivalent of the White House, and suddenly a presidential aide is making direct phone calls to the agency to get the issue favorably resolved.
The leverage of the state apparatus for direct personal familial gain is incredibly clear in that instance. But what is truly fascinating is watching what happens when governments actually try to ban the practice. It rarely sticks.
Give me an example of that.
Let's look at Argentina. The political culture there has long been criticized for treating state jobs as tokens of gratitude or party favoritism. Former President Mauricio Macri was actually formally investigated for nepotism after he allegedly extended a highly lucrative tax amnesty program that directly benefited his own family members. But then, facing public pressure in 2018, Macri's government tried to crack down. They established a formal decree, Decree 93301E.
And what did that decree do? Did it finally fix the problem?
It set very strict limits. It essentially banned the appointment of family members of high-ranking officials to the national public sector.
Good for them. Problem solved. Law is on the books.
Not quite. It brilliantly illustrates the political whiplash of these policies. Fast forward just a few years to December 2023. A new, fiercely populist libertarian president, Javier Milei, takes office. Now, Milei campaigned heavily, vociferously against what he called the corrupt political caste. He promised to end the appointment of friends, cronies, and family members. He campaigned as the ultimate anti-nepotism outsider.
So he enforced the decree.
No. One of his very first acts as president was to explicitly modify that exact 2018 anti-nepotism decree. Why? Specifically so he could legally grant his own sister, Karina Milei, the incredibly powerful position of General Secretary of the Presidency.
You literally cannot make this up. He built his entire brand on fighting the corrupt caste, and on day one, he changes the law so his sister can run his office. It is astounding.
It's a very common pattern.
But I have to ask, why do voters let them get away with this? In a democracy, voters have the ultimate power. We can just vote them out. Theoretically, we choose our leaders based on their specific policy platforms and their individual merit. Why do we keep electing dynasties?
Because name recognition is an incredibly powerful psychological tool. Humans are risk-averse. A familiar name feels safe to a voter. It feels like a known quantity, a brand you have bought before. Politicians keenly understand and exploit this psychological comfort to build inherited dynasties right inside the framework of a democratic election.
So it's basically brand loyalty.
You see it everywhere. In Greece, politics has been dominated for decades by the Papandreou and Mitsotakis families. In Belgium, you have the Tobacks, the Michels, the De Cruz. In the U.S., the Bushes and the Clintons. The family name becomes a political brand like Coca-Cola or Apple. And that brand loyalty completely bypasses the analytical, meritocratic evaluation a voter is supposed to make.
It's incredible. The brand beats the resume every time. But as frustrating and deeply unfair as that is, in those democracies, nepotism is still essentially functioning as a loophole. It's an unfair advantage within a system that still has elections and opposition parties.
Right, there are still checks and balances.
But what happens when we look at nations where the family doesn't just use the state infrastructure? They are the state infrastructure, where there is no separation between the national treasury and the family bank account. Let's move into our final section, which is, frankly, the most chilling part of this entire deep dive: total control.
This is a vital distinction. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where we transition from studying nepotism as an unfair career advantage to studying nepotism as a suffocating national oligarchy. We are no longer talking about a son getting a cabinet post. We are talking about absolute state capture. And the sources provide deeply troubling examples of the economic devastation this causes.
Let's hear one.
Let's look at Sri Lanka. The Rajapaksa family is a textbook example of familial state capture. Former President Mahinda Rajapaksa didn't just give his brothers nice titles. He appointed 3 of his brothers to run the absolute most vital, heavily funded ministries in the entire country.
I want to break down exactly what that means because the scale is hard to comprehend. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was appointed Defense Secretary. That means he controlled the entire armed forces, the police, the Coast Guard, and immigration. Absolute monopoly on state violence and borders.
Yes.
Basil Rajapaksa was made Minister of Economic Development. Absolute control over foreign investment and infrastructure. Shamal Rajapaksa was made Speaker of the Parliament. Absolute control over the legislative agenda. And Mahinda's son, Namal, was put in Parliament too, just waiting in the wing.
It's a complete web.
The most staggering data point we have is this. At the height of their power, it was estimated that the Rajapaksa brothers directly controlled over 70% of Sri Lanka's entire public budget. 70%.
Stop and think about the mechanics of that. When a single family controls 70% of a sovereign nation's budget, the fundamental line between public funds and private family wealth effectively ceases to exist. The nation becomes a family business.
And Sri Lanka isn't the only example.
No, we see a very similar, deeply entrenched system historically in Indonesia under their second president, Suharto. The system of patronage and familial wealth extraction there was so formalized, so ubiquitous, that the citizens actually had an acronym for it. KKN, which stands for corruptcy, collusi, and nepotism, corruption, collusion, and nepotism. Suharto's children, Tutut, Tommy, and Bambang, were handed literal, legally enforced monopolies by the government.
They weren't just given jobs at existing companies, they were given entire sectors of the economy. The scale of the KKN system is mind-boggling. His daughter, Tutut, essentially monopolized the incredibly lucrative toll expressway system. Tommy and Bambang were handed monopolies over the National Car Project. A cousin monopolized the entire cinema and distribution market.
It's just massive wealth extraction.
By the end of his rule, the family reportedly controlled 36,000 square kilometers of prime real estate. They controlled 40% of the land in the entire province of East Timor. And they received free, unearned shares in over 1,200 of Indonesia's most lucrative domestic companies. If you were a foreign corporation, say a massive multinational tech or manufacturing firm, and you wanted to do business in Indonesia, you were essentially told by the state that you had to establish a strategic partnership with a member of the president's family. It was a required toll.
It is the ultimate monopolization of a nation's economic potential. It chokes out all organic entrepreneurship. And for a perfect visual representation of this absolute control, we can look to Azerbaijan and the Aliyev family.
Oh, this one is wild.
Haydar Aliyev became president in 1993, establishing a rigid authoritarian regime. When he died in 2003, the presidency passed seamlessly to his son, Ilham Aliyev, who has been in power ever since. But the defining moment, the moment that truly illustrates the arrogance of total nepotistic control, occurred in 2017. President Ilham Aliyev literally created a brand new constitutional position, first vice president of Azerbaijan. And the moment the ink was dry on the new law, he immediately appointed his own wife, Mehriban Aliyeva, to fill the role.
I was looking at the photo of the Aliyev family from 2018 that was referenced in the materials. It is a stunning piece of propaganda. They're standing there, the entire family lined up perfectly against a sleek cityscape backdrop. And they don't look like a traditional political family waving to a crowd. They're posing exactly like an aggressive, modern corporate board of directors.
That's exactly the image they want to project.
It is a visual admission to the world that they view the nation of Azerbaijan not as a republic of citizens, but as a wholly owned family subsidiary. And they are far from the only ones. The history books are full of them. The Ceausescus dominating and financially draining Romania for decades. Robert Mugabe desperately preparing his wife, Grace, to take over the dictatorship of Zimbabwe before he was ousted. The handful of elite modern dynasties that have essentially passed the control of Mauritius back and forth between their families since 1948.
When you look at the mechanics of these regimes, you have to look at the severe economic devastation they cause. When nepotism reaches this level, it ceases to be mere favoritism. It is a full-blown oligarchy.
What's the real cost of that?
Think about the opportunity cost. A state's resources tax revenue, natural resource wealth, foreign aid should be deployed for building infrastructure, funding public education, and creating public welfare systems. Instead, those vast resources are siphoned and funneled into private familial wealth. It actively, aggressively stifles the nation's economic growth.
Because there's no competition.
Exactly. It crushes free market competition because no citizen can compete with a company owned by the president's son. And most dangerously, it completely alienates the citizenry, who eventually realize that the system is entirely closed to them, no matter how hard they work. It is the death of meritocracy on a national scale, and it almost inevitably ends in economic collapse or revolution.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at Catholic popes in the Middle Ages using linguistic loopholes to hide their sons as nephews to consolidate power. We ventured into the boardroom, looking at the corporate echo chambers where innovation suffocates because everyone has the same last name. We look at the glittering hills of Hollywood and the massive sports arenas where the public's belief in the illusion of meritocracy is constantly visibly tested. We walk the quiet halls of academia and the Supreme Courts, exploring the terrifying reality of what happens when the systems designed to find objective truth and blind justice become exclusive multi-generational clubs.
And then the national stage.
Right. And finally, we witness the iron grip of global political dynasties, from the legal loopholes of the American West Wing to the absolute budget-draining state capture of Sri Lanka and Indonesia.
It has been a vast, complex journey. But if I can synthesize the core takeaway for the listener, it is relatively simple, though profoundly impactful.
Let's hear it.
Nepotism stems from a deeply natural, completely understandable human impulse. We possess a biological and psychological desire to protect, elevate, and provide for our kin. We want to see our children succeed. However, what we have seen today is that on a systemic, societal level, indulging that natural impulse requires a devastating trade-off. It inherently trades long-term competence, market innovation, and fundamental societal fairness in exchange for short-term familial loyalty and comfort.
It is the definition of taking the easy, comfortable road while actively burning the bridge of progress behind you. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. We spend so much of our time, especially in the media and on the internet, analyzing the Nepo babies who succeed. We point our fingers at the politicians, the Hollywood actors, the corporate CEOs who clearly got the job because of their dad's influence.
We do focus a lot on the winners.
But I want you to think about the flip side of that coin. I want you to think about the invisible graveyard of human innovation. How many brilliant, transformative leaders, how many life-saving doctors who could have cured diseases, how many visionary artists or paradigm-shifting engineers did society completely miss out on simply because they didn't have the right last name to get into the room?
It's a haunting question.
Think back to that marathon starting line we talked about at the very beginning of the show. Every single time someone gets a free, unearned ride in the golf cart, someone else, someone who trained their whole life, someone who played by the rules, someone who might have actually broken the world record, is quietly, invisibly pushed out of the race entirely. So the next time you see a familiar legacy name on a voting ballot, or a movie poster, or a corporate press release, don't just look at who got the job. Ask yourself, who isn't in the room? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems and the sources of power around you, and we will see you next time.